My name's John McCusker. I am a photographer for the Times-Picayune. The storm had largely passed by Monday morning. Around noon, some of us fanned out into the CBD to try to make what pictures we could. There was still stuff falling off the buildings and crashing on Poydras Street and Canal. You saw a lot of damage, but you didn't see the water. The water had not come up yet. By late Monday, when I made a picture of people evacuating these babies out of a neighborhood in this big rubber tub, we were thinking something catastrophic must have happened because the water was up, it hadn't rained in hours, and it was continuing to rise. We went to bed that night at the paper, and when we woke up the next morning, the water was at our door. I brought my kayak to work, fearing the worst, and I set out with it that morning to go shoot some pictures, and by the time I got back to the paper, the water had risen from the second step to the third step, and our editor Jim Amos was standing there when I got back, assessing the situation, and his face just looked really grim because he was dealing with the fact that the worst had in fact happened, and it was all dawning on us by then that there had been a catastrophic levee failure. By 9 o'clock or so Tuesday, our publisher, Ashton Phelps, decided that our position was untenable at the paper, and the decision was made that we were going to evacuate. We didn't just have journalists there. We had grandmothers, we had babies, we had all sorts of family members there. And they all loaded up into the newspaper delivery trucks, and we made this dash to try to get out. And it's good that we did leave when we did, because the water was continuing to rise. The trucks barely made it out. At one point, when we were going through high water, this light is flashing on the dashboard, water and fuel, water and fuel. But we managed to get to the interstate, which was high ground, it wasn't underwater. We got across the river and went to our West Bank office. And there we divided our party up. Most everyone headed to Homa and then later on to Baton Rouge, where they were trying to set up a provisional operation for us. And about 10 of us volunteered to go back into the city and cover what was going on. This group covered the looting at the Walmart. We covered the rescue operations that were going on in the Ninth Ward, bringing people out of there. And really, we just fanned out just to try to find what we could find. Some people went out on bicycles and rode around. We had stored cars at some of the garages so that they wouldn't flood out, and we went and retrieved those automobiles, so we gave us some mobility to get around. Logistically, we were challenged because our cell phones weren't working. We discovered later, in fact, my son discovered, that you could text message. And he sent me a text message, said, "Daddy, the text messaging's working." So we figured that out, but after a day or so. But on Tuesday, when we went back into the city, we found it hard to get around. You had, on the streets that weren't underwater, you had trees down, you had all kinds of debris in the road. So we had to contend with that. You know, you might start out on Chapatulas Street uptown to get to the Ninth Ward, you know, end up on Decatur and then Charters, then have to cut over to another street because there's a tree down. It was kind of like a Rubik's Cube trying to figure out how to get from one place to another. I guess my thought when I was taking the pictures at that time, the state of emergency, you know, you've got people that are going on their second day without a drink of water or food or shelter. So the initial thinking on my part was to make pictures that would bring the cavalry, whatever the cavalry was going to be, and just try to make some pictures to show people the suffering and what was going on. And it actually was one of the nicer things that happened was on Wednesday, I walked up to this group of people that were sheltering out in the open on the interstate because it was an elevated part of the expressway and it was above the water, and there were people there, you know, they had grandmothers and shopping carts that they had to push up there, and they're trying to keep the children corralled together. And I went up to some people and I introduced myself. I'm a photographer with the Picayune, And their eyes got really big and they looked at me and they said, "You're still here." I guess they assumed that everybody had just taken off. And I found it reassuring that my presence there was reassuring to them. You know, it is something of a paradox what happened with Katrina, because for several days we couldn't print a newspaper. And we were out there shooting pictures and writing stories, not even really sitting and thinking that there was no doorstep to throw these newspapers to. In fact, about 3 days into the ordeal, I looked up and saw one of our team members crying. And I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "How can you have a newspaper without a readership?" But you see, it shows that we were still in the old way of thinking, because our readers found us on our website. And not just our readers, readers from around the world. We were having over 30 million hits a day on our website. 30 million. I mean, the Picayune subscription was in the 100,000s before the storm. 33 million people every day were going to our website. And that's got to make you feel good, because with all the national media outlets, international media there, people trusted us to tell them the real deal on New Orleans, because we know New Orleans. It's our town. We know every street. We know every alleyway. And they knew that we could tell the story probably better than the people that had just parachuted in. So what we thought was going to be one of our lowest points ended up being a real point of pride, that people still wanted to find us, and the way that they found us was through the web. I came back around the 20th of September and set out to try to make the pictures that were to be made then. The city had been pumped out. It was largely, the water was gone. So at that point, the first people are trickling back and seeing their homes and seeing what they look like. And that was a whole new wrinkle in the story. It was people coming to the reality that their world had just been shaken to the core, and their lives as they had known it were over. You know, when I look back on the Katrina experience, there were a number of things that we did that were crazy. I mean, just throwing on my cameras and running into a Walmart that's in the middle of being looted was just insane. But you know, when I think about it now, I'm more scared now than I was then. I mean, the fear of the danger that we were in and the situation we were in really came to affect me later, more so than when I was actually in it. When you're actually in it, your heart's pounding. You're thinking deadline. You're thinking, how am I going to get my pictures back when all the communications infrastructure is compromised? You're thinking about all that stuff, and you're thinking about making the picture. It's only later that I really got disturbed by it. You know, at one point we were at the Walmart, and I'm taking pictures, and you know, you've got the police are looting DVDs. It's just an orgy of unbelievable proportions. But while I was wrapped up shooting my pictures, one of the reporters overheard a group of what he described as thugs saying, "The Times-Picayune's over there taking pictures, let's go take care of business." He heard this and came running over and basically grabbed my shirt and said, "It's time to go." And he dragged me out of there. And I think that's the point where I maybe got a little scared, you know. But, you know, there were a lot of times that I think we were in danger and didn't know it. I think we were just so dulled down by all the trauma and everything that was going on around us that our radar that would normally be up for that sort of thing wasn't necessarily up. My goal in the Katrina experience was to try to make some pictures that would affect people and make them understand what had happened. That was all I was thinking about, was just making people understand what was going on and how widespread the destruction and the misery was. So, you know, in a way, every picture you make is kind of like a Rorschach. You know, you hold it up and it means certain things to some people and different things to other people. But I just got to think that there's something in the spirit of this country that they don't like to see their people suffering. I think it's fair to say that Katrina is going to be a seminal event in my life. I worked through it as long as I could, but the post-traumatic stress caught up with me. I took a leave of absence from the paper in May and part of June last year to try to regroup and get my brain back together. It was shattered by this. At the end of the first week, I couldn't read anymore. I had to come back from that. I didn't have the attention to even sit through a newscast. It just burned my brain out. So I kept waiting for things to get better, and they never really did. So I took this leave and got some counseling. Unfortunately, there was a screw up with my health insurance, and none of this got paid for. So when I got to the point that I was actually getting better, I had to discontinue treatment. And that was unfortunate. My mental state grew steadily worse, and on August 8th, 2006, I took a dose of Klonopin, which is a prescription sedative. I was having an anxiety attack, and I just wanted to take it and go to sleep. Unfortunately, I had never taken this drug before, though it had been prescribed for me. I took it, and it caused a blackout, and I ended up driving all over uptown New Orleans, ended up in a police chase. The police shot at me, and they ended up tasering me and taking me into custody. I'm now looking at 2 years in prison for criminal flight from a police officer and aggravated battery on a police officer. So when I look back on the Katrina experience, it took every material possession that I had, and now ultimately I'm in danger of losing my freedom.